The Dallas Mavericks are now the biggest disaster in the NBA, and that's saying a lot. We have a team like the New Orleans Pelicans that suck and gave away next year's first-round pick. The Nets are one of the worst teams that we've seen in the league over the last 10 years. The Sacramento Kings are really sad again, but somehow the Mavs situation is worse than any of them. They, of course, traded away Luka Doncic, beloved by the fan base, a young perennial MVP candidate, less than a year removed from an NBA Finals appearance, to acquire Anthony Davis, which effectively shrunk their championship window down to 2 or 3 years. And now, in their first full season after the trade, they're one of the worst teams in the Western Conference. A move that was made in theory to make the Mavs better right now, to push their chips in on defense and size and competitiveness in a way that, in their opinion, they just couldn't with Luka, has actually not only ruined the future of the team, but also the present. But these were all things that pretty much everybody knew at the time that they traded Luka. Everyone but the people running the Mavs knew that it was a bad idea, knew AD wouldn't be able to stay healthy, knew dumping a player like Luka was almost never the right move. But then a new wrinkle was added at the time of the 2025 NBA draft lottery when the Mavs, against super small odds, somehow ended up with the first overall pick, and Cooper Flagg was one of the best NBA draft prospects we've seen in a long time. And at that moment, when the Mavs miraculously won the draft lottery for the first time since the Luka trade, there was actually hope in Dallas. Flagg not only was a great prospect, but fit perfectly within this highly competitive defense-first culture that the Mavs have been trying to build since they traded Luka. He was versatile, could play multiple positions, and was exactly the kind of boost that the franchise needed to try and distance themselves from the Luka trade. But more importantly, Flagg represented the future of Mavs basketball, a future that they stupidly threw away just a few months prior. By some crazy stroke of luck, they had hope again. They could compete now like they wanted to and still have a future around Flagg. The problem is nothing has gone right in Dallas to begin this season, putting into question obviously the future of the decision makers in Dallas, but also the future of this version of the team. In terms of this season on the floor, it is no secret why the Mavs have not been good this year. The thesis for this team was going to be one of the best defensive teams in the league, overwhelm you with size, a really good rebounding team, and get enough spacing from guys like Klay Thompson and PJ Washington, get enough playmaking from Cooper Flagg and then Kyrie Irving once he returns, and none of that stuff has happened. They're one of the worst offensive teams in the league. They can't get to the paint at all. They can't shoot. They can't create really any good open looks, and the open looks that they are getting, they're not making very many of them, and it is just a team of guys that are not used to facilitating at this level. Even someone like Cooper Flagg, who is a really good prospect and is good at a lot of stuff, does not have necessarily an elite skill, nor would you expect him to at this point, given that he's just now turning 19 years old here very soon. And even amongst all those different skills that he has, the one that he had to work on arguably the most amongst his defense and his competitiveness and athleticism was, one, shooting, and two, creation, shot creation, and playmaking, which of course are the two ways in which the Mavs struggle the most. But there's two big issues here for Dallas, apart from just the fact that the team is not playing well. One, the Kyrie Irving of this is obviously floating over everything, and you could point to the fact that him not being there and him getting hurt after them trading away Luka is why the team is so bad. I'm sure that's what Nico Harrison would say, right? The problem is, coming into the year, they knew they weren't going to have Kyrie Irving for most of, if not the entire season. And so they had an opportunity in the offseason to go out and get some kind of guard, someone that could create for them. This was a problem that was easy to see coming in Dallas, and their answer to it was bringing in D'Angelo Russell, then not really playing him, then playing him more, then realizing he's not that good, then relying on some of these other guards. You knew coming into the season that your guard creation rotation was D'Angelo Russell and a couple of back of the roster guys, and that just could not have been the plan coming into the season. This is not a surprise for Dallas. The other issue for them is the thesis of the team with size and rebounding and just overwhelming force has not happened either. Yes, they're very good on defense. They're not a good offensive rebounding team. And if you're going to be missing as many shots as the Mavs are, you would expect to be an overwhelming presence on the offensive glass, the way that a team like Houston is, for example, that actually has a good offensive rating and, yes, better perimeter players, guys like Kevin Durant, the ascending Amen Thompson, but also they are destroying teams on the offensive glass even when they do miss, and that's raising their overall offensive efficiency. That's not happening in Dallas. You cannot be both a bad shooting, a bad creation, and bad offensive rebounding team and expect to be anything but what the Mavs have been to begin this season, which is one of the worst offensive teams in the entire league. And the one excuse that you would have at this point if you were running the Mavs and trying to keep your job is wait until Kyrie comes back. Because if they didn't have Kyrie on the roster, obviously, I would assume they wouldn't have traded Luka because that took away all of their perimeter creation. And they're thinking, we have Kyrie, he's really good. We bring in Anthony Davis in exchange for Luka. We still have that creation and we have so much size and defense and rebounding. And then Kyrie immediately gets hurt. Couple of issues here. One, I don't know if Kyrie Irving's coming back this season. Two, I don't know if that's necessarily going to solve all your problems. And three, even if it did solve some of your problems, the expectation that you're going to be getting all NBA level Kyrie Irving immediately coming back in the middle of the season, coming off of an ACL injury is just completely unrealistic. There is no light at the end of the tunnel for this season for the Mavs and for their fans, even if you're expecting Kyrie to return this year and be good, which personally I think is very unrealistic. And while obviously the focus of this situation is on the Luka trade in the first place, what I keep coming back to is, what if the Mavs didn't get the first overall pick in the lottery? What if they ended up right where they were supposed to be, outside of the top 10, and they got some random guy in the draft class? There are guys that have been playing really well outside of the top 10 in this class, but realistically for Dallas, they had plenty of depth. They had plenty of guys that could do something for them, and they needed this, the superstar potential guy, and that's what Cooper Flagg represents. But what if they didn't get that? How much worse would this team be if you just remove Cooper Flagg from the situation and add in some outside of the top 10 rookie that probably isn't going to contribute? Not just in the immediate sense, but in terms of the future. How much bleaker would this Mavs situation look without the promise of some kind of future of Cooper Flagg? It's the only thing they've been able to do, or that has happened to them. They didn't do anything, but that has happened to them, that has allowed them to distance themselves even a little bit from the debacle that is the Luka trade. If you remove that, it becomes that much more of a disaster. And given how bad the team has been, given the Kyrie injury stuff, Anthony Davis has already hurt, a potential change in the front office that could come this season, at what point do the Mavs then decide it's time to move into the Cooper Flagg era? The Luka trade was a disaster. That is a sunk cost at this point, and the roster we have constructed, even with Kyrie coming back, is just not good enough. At what point is it realistic to expect that the ownership group is going to move on from Nico Harrison, and then they're going to look at trading Anthony Davis and PJ Washington and some of these other veterans on the roster and realize that it's time to now build around Cooper Flagg? Obviously, the counter to that is, if you wait until next year, the thesis of the team is still there that provided at least a little bit of optimism coming into this season. Depth, size, Kyrie is back and healthy, another year of Cooper Flagg having some experience in the NBA, and all of a sudden you have that optimism again where maybe you could compete at the top of the West. That's the obvious counter against trading guys at the deadline, looking at Anthony Davis trades potentially in the offseason. And the problem with that is the problem with, or at least one of the problems with the Luka trade in the first place, is that idea of that team, Kyrie, Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, bunch of depth, relies on health. It relies on a 30-something-year-old Kyrie Irving to be really good coming back from an ACL injury and also not get hurt again. It relies on Anthony Davis, 30-something years old at this point, who gets hurt every single year, not getting hurt again. It relies on Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, guys that continue to get hurt every single season, having a healthy year. And even if that happens next year, that doesn't guarantee you anything in the Western Conference. It doesn't mean that the team is going to be good. And even if it did happen, that's probably the only year that you have left. They knew it when they made the Luka trade, that it was probably a 2-year window here with AD and Kyrie and whatever else. And that second year is next year. And if you don't have the healthy season, or you have the healthy season and don't compete the way that you want to, all of a sudden you're looking at a team that, yes, has Cooper Flagg, but doesn't own a lot of their future first-round picks, does have an extra one for the Lakers, but doesn't own a lot of their future ones, has a lot of big contracts on the roster, and potentially contracts in someone like Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving that, given their injury history, could be incredibly difficult to move. And so I wonder if there is a scenario here where the debacle of the Luka trade just has an expiration date, and the Mavs realize they made one of the biggest mistakes in the history of the league, and it's just time to accept that and move on. And this concept of this team that Nico Harrison had, this vision that he had for the team, never made sense in the first place and is never going to come to fruition. And rather than waiting around to realize that after Kyrie comes back this year or going into next year. Rather than waiting to realize that, they go ahead and are proactive about making the choice that it's time to move on and it's time to build around Cooper Flag. I don't think that scenario is all that unlikely or unrealistic, and I don't think it's nearly as far away as many people expected it to be coming into the season.